Our speaker today is Hayes-Raitt, who will talk about Syrian refugees, the most pressing humanitarian crisis of our time. 12 million people, half of Syria's population, have fled their homes since the outbreak of the Syrian civil war 4 years ago. Kelly spent the summer of 2008 living in Damascus and helping Iraqi refugees there. She was also in Berlin last September, right after Chancellor Angela Merkel opened Germany's borders to 800,000 Syrian refugees. She will update us on the crisis and her recent experiences. Let's welcome Kelly Hayes-Raitt.
Good morning. It's such a privilege and pleasure to be back here at Open Circle. So thank you all for coming and sharing your time with me. 60 million people are currently displaced worldwide because of conflict, according to the outgoing head of the UNHCR, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. 60 million people displaced because of conflict. Others are economic refugees, such as those from the Philippines, where the economy is so bad that many Filipinos seek work overseas, which provides the country's largest source of income, money from overseas workers. Families are torn apart for years as economic refugees work abroad. Others are climate change refugees, like those who fled New Orleans on the Gulf Coast following Hurricane Katrina and the levee breaks. I'll be talking about that this afternoon at the theater in Plaza Bougainvilleas, following the Democrats' broad showing of a documentary called Climate Refugees at 1:30 this afternoon. But 60 million people are conflict refugees. That's the equivalent of the population of California and Florida. As Margaret mentioned, some 12 million people, half of Syria's population, have fled their homes since the outbreak of the Syrian civil war 5 years ago. That's more than 3 times the number of people who live in Los Angeles. Almost 70% of these refugees are women and children, according to the U.S. State Department. More than 4 million of those 12 million refugees have fled to neighboring Jordan, Lebanon, Turkey, and Iraq, creating the world's biggest refugee crisis since World War II. From there, they try to reach Western European countries where prospects are better. Last year alone, nearly 1 million refugees from throughout the world flooded Europe, said Antonio Guterres, the former UN High Commissioner for Refugees, in a recent TED Talk. That feels huge, he says, but it's only 1 refugee per 2,000 Europeans, whereas in Lebanon, there's 1 refugee for every 3 Lebanese. In explaining this recent influx into Europe, Guterres cites a World Bank study. 87% of Syrians who've resettled in nearby Jordan and 93% of Syrians in Lebanon live below the national poverty level, and only half of the refugee children attend school. Is it any wonder that they're trying to get to Europe to better lives? By coincidence, I happened to be house-sitting in Berlin last September, right after Chancellor Angela Merkel opened Germany's doors to 800,000 Syrian refugees. About 45,000 of those refugees will end up in Berlin. Here's the story I wrote about meeting one of those refugees who had just newly arrived in Berlin. I wrote it for a column for a newspaper that I write for in Los Angeles. Ahmed and I met last week at a refugee intake area in Berlin. He traveled more than 2,000 precarious kilometers by boat, train, and foot from Syria. I'm here every day, 7 in the morning to 7 at night. They feed me, but I'm not here for the food, he says. I'm here to contribute to society. Ahmed is a 36-year-old pharmacist from a small village outside Aleppo who decided he'd had enough violence. He and 9 friends joined 30 others to travel from Syria through Turkey to Greece to Macedonia to Serbia to Hungary to Austria and finally to Germany, where they hoped to build new lives. Ahmed brought with him only what he could carry, and he dumped half of that in the Aegean Sea to keep afloat the ramshackle boat that carried them from Turkey to Greece. 40 people in a boat 7 meters long and 2 meters wide, he said. You've seen the photos. children and women in our bags. It's not easy to leave Syria. It takes 2 to 3 days by bus from my little village to Aleppo because of the fighting, he continues. After the boat, we walked every day for 5 hours. I glanced at his flimsy sandals and worn shoes. Refugees gather outside Berlin's Office of Health and Social Welfare and wait for their number to appear on an LED board, which signals their opportunity to register as an asylum seeker. Several hundred people, including young children, elderly women, mill about or lounge on a grassy area that is surrounded by red brick government offices. The square would feel like a college campus if it weren't for the weary looks on people's faces. Berlin's government workers are overwhelmed, registering 150 people each day, while the crowd outside their office swells. Refugees complain bitterly about waiting for weeks for their number to post. There's confusion with the system, confusion with the staff, confusion everywhere, says Ahmed, echoing others' frustrations. I've been here 10 days. At first we were sleeping on the street. Now we are sleeping in a camp. It costs €6 to take the bus from the camp to this building every day. Amidst all this chaos, dozens of volunteers who sort mounds of donated clothing and toys, distribute bottles of water from shopping carts, and offer a smile to the exasperated refugees. Wanting not just to write, but to help, contribute and be productive myself, I join the volunteers. I meet Barrett and his volunteer team. Barrett is a 50-something freelance computer guy who speaks English and directs me to sign in, sanitize my hands, and don rubber gloves at the volunteer rendezvous station. We head into the refugee crowd with a grocery cart overflowing with water bottles, juice boxes, and fruit cups. I'm eager. Children reach for juice boxes, they utter a carefully rehearsed Dankeschön, and then break into a surprised smile when I respond with Afwan, you're welcome, in Arabic. I fill my arms with 6, 7, 8 bottles of water and plow into the crowd. The refugees are kind, if not quite as eager as I am. They've been through this. Many hold up water bottles they've already received. Others act as if they wish to make me feel better, I think, by accepting my offering. Sheepishly, I realize how pathetic this small gesture is. They appreciate it, but what they really need, as Ahmed noted, is a chance to be productive. As dire as Ahmed's situation is, he's actually one of the lucky ones. According to a report released just 8 weeks ago by the Syrian Center for Policy Research, 11% of Syria's people have been killed or injured during the 5-year civil war. That's 470,000 people killed in the war. That's nearly 11 people an hour, 24 hours a day, for 5 years straight. 11 people killed an hour for 5 years straight. So what started all this? Syria is a country the size of North Dakota, where according to the license plates I see many of you are from, Syria has a pre-war population of 23 million people. In 2008, the summer I lived in Damascus helping Iraqi refugees, the average Syrian could expect to live until 75 years of age. The healthcare and education system was that widespread. But let's go through a timeline. March 2011. Following on the heels of Arab Spring, some students in Daraa graffitied anti-Assad slogans on a school wall and were arrested and tortured. Protests erupted. Assad security forces opened fire on the pro-democracy demonstrators, killing several people, which led to more pro-democracy protests. July 2011. Hundreds of thousands around the country were demonstrating for democracy and for Assad's resignation. Demonstrators eventually began to take up arms, first to protect themselves, and later to expel Assad's security forces from their local areas. Violence escalated and the country descended into civil war as rebel brigades were formed to battle government forces for control. Summer of 2013. ISIS starts to gel in Baghdad. Some of you might remember that in January 2013, Iraq was considered safe enough for me to return. But by the summer, ISIS was conducting simultaneous bombings in Iraq before they spilled in Syria. August 2013. Hundreds of Syrians were killed after rockets filled with the nerve agent sarin were fired in several suburbs in Damascus. Western powers said it could only be carried out by Syria's government, but the government blamed the rebel forces. Facing the prospect of U.S. military intervention, Assad agreed to the complete removal and destruction of Syria's chemical weapons. Fast forward to September 2014. A U.S.-led coalition launched airstrikes into Syria in an attempt to destroy ISIS. A year later, Russia started airstrikes, targeting terrorists, but opposition activists say its strikes have mostly killed Western-backed pro-democracy rebels and civilians. So what we have now is this former Arab Spring uprising that's now become a proxy war for the two major superpowers in the world, U.S. and Russia and their respective allies. Iran, Russia, and Lebanon's Hezbollah back Assad's Shia government. The U.S., backed by the UK, France, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Jordan, oppose Assad. Where does all this leave the Syrians? 6 million are internally displaced. What a horrible phrase that is, internally displaced. Isn't it just a sanitizing phrase? It's like collateral damage. It doesn't say what it really is. 6 million people are homeless within their own country. About 70% of those people are without access to adequate drinking water. 1 in 3 people are unable to meet their basic food needs. More than 2 million children are out of school. 4 out of 5 people live in poverty. About 13.8 million Syrians have lost their source of livelihood. No wonder the people who can afford to leave. Okay, that was a lot of statistics. When I was in Berlin in 2013, in 2013, I met Dr. Franklin Lamb, who's an American and ardent proponent of restoring Palestinians' rights. He's been in Lebanon for 40 years. His wife, Janet, was in the American Embassy in 1983, meeting with an American aide about the massacres of Palestinians from the Sabra and Shatila camps when the embassy was bombed. She died. She was 32 years old and pregnant. Franklin stayed and has created various programs to help Palestinians. He writes for Counterpunch, Al Jazeera, and other media outlets. His reporting, for my taste, is a bit dry and academic, but it's very carefully researched. But I was quite surprised recently to receive a personal essay from him titled, "Why I Bought 4 Syrian Children Off of Beirut Street." And I'd like to read a part of that for you. By Franklin Lamb. This observer confesses to having purchased 4 children near the beach recently from a stressed-out Syrian woman. I'm not sure if she was as she appeared to be, or was from one of the human trafficking gangs which operates widely these days in Lebanon as they market Syrian children or vulnerable adult women. The vendor claimed to have been the 4 children's neighbor in Aleppo, and that they, 2 5-year-old twin girls, a boy about 1 year, and his bigger brother, 8 years old, lost their parents in the war. She and they ended up in Lebanon, but she explained to me that she was afraid to register with the UNHCR because she is an illegal and has no ID. The woman told me that she could no longer take care of the shivering children, did not want to just leave them on the street. She would give them all to me for $1,000, or I could pick and choose from the siblings for $250 each. Completely shocked, I disgustingly said, "Halas! Enough," in Arabic, and looked around for a police car. I looked back over my shoulder and saw that the children were very frightened, soaked from the rain, very cold, and appeared hungry. Without thinking, I instantly offered the seller $600 for all 4 brothers and sisters. She took it, saying she was going to Turkey and would try to get to Lesbos Island off Greece. The lady gave me 10 minutes to go to an ATM and get the $600 cash. She demanded US dollars, not Lebanese currency. The children seemed to understand what was happening, and their eyes fixated on me. What was racing through my mind as I mounted my motorbike and searched for an ATM? The expressions on the faces of these angels as their caregiver bargained for their fate. I was also thinking about the many horror stories from all over Syria and the villages just an hour's drive from the Lebanon border, such as Nadia and Zabadani, where children were under vicious siege, were forced to survive on animal feed and soup made from whatever weeds could be found. We all read the media reports about the extermination of Wadamia, that's just a few miles from Damascus, where 3 newborn babies died last month after medical staff ran out of IV bags. I thought about the scale of exploitation faced by Syrian refugee children in Lebanon, of the tens of thousands sleeping rough through these frigid nights, and the countless thousands who every day are easy prey for abuse. I thought about the fact that refugee relief efforts in Lebanon are chronically underfunded, and that even the UNHCR has been forced to cut aid from all but the neediest of refugees due to insufficient funds. I thought of that recent Save the Children report, of their survey showing that more than a third of Syrian parents reported that their children often go without a single meal a day, and a quarter have seen children in their towns dying because of lack of food. I thought about the intense, vicious anti-refugee harangues from some of Lebanese politicians that Syrian refugees pose a threat to the country's security and economic stability, even though the menial jobs they do find are not likely to replace many, if any, Lebanese job seekers. Many fear-mongering Lebanese politicians even make the Donald appear compassionate. I thought about the Syrian children I see daily begging as they wander Beirut streets selling chewing gum or flowers or shining shoes. And I thought about the 11 or 12-year-old girls, some of whom I've come to be acquainted with from my visits to the beach, where I like to go to take a break and stare into the Mediterranean and just think about life and talk to those antisocial fiddler crowds who pop up from their homes along the beach, grab something and disappear quick. These beautiful, innocent children skip along or pace the Corniche, waiting for cars with blackened windows to pull up. And they do regularly. Then the pedophiles molest the children for a few dollars before pulling off and disappearing into the traffic. Sometimes they keep the children with them. This observer has given the local police photos of some of their license plates, but one supervisor at the Hamra police station regretted that the cops are too overwhelmed with other matters to get very involved in these cases. More than once I was given a shoulder shrug and upturned palms in reference to the case of a young girl, Layla, that I have reported more than once. One female officer told me, well, at least she is earning money for her family. This observer recently wrote some friends about the same Layla, a 12-year-old sweetheart who worked on the Corniche Beach Strip. Her friends on the Strip have since reported to me that Layla never returned from work last week, and they have no idea what has become of her. I took my new children to my flat, and a friend, a lovely domestic worker, agreed to stay at home and help care for them until we could get some help, a proper home, and the older boy in school. Over the next few hours and the next day, I made several calls to get help for the children. But other than promises to return calls and to try to find some organization to help, nothing useful for the children came of my efforts. Most of my calls were never returned. The children were well taken care of by my friend and me, and they were soon cooking and eating American cuisine, including baking fudge brownies, chocolate chip cookies, enjoying my country-style homemade macaroni and cheese, homemade banana pancakes with fake Aunt Jemima syrup from the local supermarket, and my chicken vegetable soup, not to mention some very delicious Ethiopian food, which they helped my friend make. They also became expert at playing hide and seek and met some Syrian kids from the neighborhood. The effect of meeting fellow Syrians and hearing their accents brought the darlings sheer joy, and soon they were chatting and playing like those wild Disney chipmunks, Chip and Dale. This observer often receives emails asking his opinion of events in the region, posing various questions, or even asking his 2 cents worth of advice about academic subjects a student somewhere might be engaging in. To date, never has he been asked about buying Syrian refugee children in Lebanon. If and when this observer is asked, and if the facts were similar to those I happened across recently near the Corniche, with the priceless 4-sibling mine now deeply honored to be their American uncle. Without doubt or fear of possible legal ramifications for encouraging what some may consider a felony of sorts, I would strongly urge Good Samaritans to take the following steps. To investigate as best they can on the scene, depending on how dire the situation appears to be, and if they judge the children to be in immediate grave danger, to price bargain and buy the children from the trafficker on the spot. I would counsel the Samaritan to discreetly photograph the seller with their smartphone. In my case, having only a $10 used old Nokia dumb phone, which, truth told, does for me all it needs to do, I gave the police only a physical description of the woman, as I keep an eye out for her along the beach or when I am in Hamra. All of us must do what we can to get these children from Syria a safe environment, a chance to play, and a chance to be children. Dear reader, if you happen to be in this area and by chance come upon a need such as I did, please make these angels feel protected and safe. Make them warm, get them clean clothes, feed them, get them medical examination, contact authorities or NGOs for help, and buy them a doll to love. Knowing you may not get immediate assistance, inquire about schooling. And most importantly, dear reader, find them a mother. And hopefully before long, they will be in a loving home until the hell next door ends, and they, as their country's future, can return home, grace it, and soon help restore and eventually rebuild Syria. Franklin Lamb has started a lunch program to feed Syrian kids who hang out on the Corniche. Every day, 2 Syrian women he's hired make and pack lunches that get distributed to the hungry children. Each lunch costs $2.25. I'm sending a check this week. If you'd like to add to it, see me afterwards. I was really depressed this week, researching and preparing this talk, until I started researching some of the incredible and creative help that's out there. Besides Franklin's work, there are small, localized efforts throughout the Middle East and Europe helping refugees. For example, there's a group in Germany that's raising money to pay for extra rooms in Germans' homes. It's kind of like an Airbnb for refugees. Isn't that clever? I put together a list of 20 groups, big ones, like ones you've heard of, like Mercy Corps, and some of the smaller groups. And there's links to all of them on my website, which is livinglargeinlimbo.com. www.livinglargeinlimbo.com. Another way to help in this situation is to write your government leaders. Canadians can write your new Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, who pledged to accept 35,000 Syrians. Write him and thank him. He's probably gotten his fair share of hate mail over that. The Obama administration, on the positive side, has donated by far the largest amount of money for humanitarian aid for Syrian refugees. $4.5 billion. $4.5 billion with a B. The United States government has given for Syrian refugees. Write your legislators and thank them. Thank the White House. However, shamefully, during these last 5 years of the Syrian war, the U.S. has accepted fewer than 2,300 Syrian refugees, although President Obama has pledged to accept 10,000 more during this fiscal year. Meanwhile, 31 governors of 31 American states declared that they would not welcome Syrian refugees in their states. It's a pompous position at best, since governors have no authority to close state borders to anyone who has legally entered the U.S. But that's the political climate right now in the U.S. My fellow Americans, you may have heard there's a high-profile election happening right now in the States. Let's use that opportunity. We're seeing unprecedented vitriol against immigrants during this presidential campaign. Just because we live here, our voices and our votes still count. And they're still critical. Please email your U.S. senators, your congressional representatives from the White House, and call for America to step up and allow more Syrians to take refuge in the U.S. Write letters to your home newspaper editors. Talk to friends. As Franklin Lamb wrote, Hopefully before long, the children will be in a loving home until the hell next summer ends, and they, as the country's future, can return home, embrace it, and soon help restore and eventually rebuild Syria. Let's take this opportunity during the high-profile presidential campaign to rebuild the conversation about refugees in America. This is our opportunity to make a difference in 12 million people's lives. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we have some time for questions.
Yeah, we're going to open. Oh, now it is on. If you have a question, raise your hand. Someone will bring you the mic.
Hey Kelly,
Hi, Ty.
how are you? Great talk, thank you for doing this. So you mentioned earlier you referred to climate refugees, and it's widely understood that the underlying impetus for the Syrian war is their ongoing drought and historic drought. It's been going on for I think a decade or more. They've had massive crop failure, and there's really no end in sight. So given that sort of reality, I guess I would argue, or I guess it could be argued, that the real reason for these folks being refugees is the climate, because this I don't know if this drought has been tied directly to climate change. It is historic and unprecedented in their history, at least that which is understood through climate records. I don't want to put you on the spot, but are you able to speak to that side of things? Because it seems to me, you know, we can all wish everybody well and try and help these folks to return home, but what are they returning to? Are we talking about a situation where, you know, there's really, unless there's some serious policies put into place, you know, surrounding like human population, etc. Is it a valid thing to want to send these, you know, get these folks home?
That's a really excellent point, Kai. When I was in Damascus in 2009 for that summer helping Iraqi refugees, Syria was in pretty dire economic straits. Inflation was at 35%, unemployment was at 25%. Because of the drought, a lot of people had left their farms and their rural homes and were flocking to Damascus and were basically unemployed. And that's why one of the reasons why the unemployment rate was so high. Also, the cost of electricity had just skyrocketed and quadrupled actually overnight until the Assad administration reacted to people's complaints and lowered the cost back down and subsidized the oil, except for Iraqi refugees who are still paying the 4 times higher rate, which made it very difficult for them. But you're right, what are people coming back to? But they do want to go back. I mean, if you talk to people around the world who are working with Syrian refugees, that's the one thing you hear, is that they want their children to be safe, and eventually they want to be able to go back home to their lives, their society, their country, and they want to rebuild. Just like Iraqis now are going back to Iraq. And, I mean, there are, I'm a little surprised to actually read this, there are nearly 250,000 Syrian refugees in Iraq. So while Iraq is still unstable politically and unstable economically, and ISIS is still based there is a movement among people to rebuild their own community and their own society. But the climate change issue is very important. And again, I'll just do a little plug for the Democrats Bar movie this afternoon at 1:30 at Plaza Buenos. And I'll be speaking after that about climate change refugees. And it's a different talk.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Kelly. Can you hear me? Yes? No. No? Also stand up.
Stand up, please. Stand up, please.
All right. Can you hear me better now? I don't think so. I want to make a point about the refugees. We know that Europe has been totally overwhelmed by the influx. And sadly,
Europe has closed its borders now. And it breaks my heart to see the refugees being sent back to Turkey. Is there any way you can see out of this predicament?
Well, there's a short answer, and there's a bigger picture answer, right? The short answer is to provide people with immediate help that they need now. I mean, the reason why Europe and the Middle East has been so besieged, by refugees, that they need help. I mean, they need help. So any help that we're able to give, whether it's a few dollars for a lunch program in the Corniche in Beirut, to passing information along about different organizations in Europe that are working on the ground to help refugees. Maybe you have friends in Europe that you could forward the link in my website to. It's a way of just letting people know what kinds of things are out there. I think that's really important. So helping people with immediate needs is something that will help promote goodwill between the refugees and the people of the host countries. The longer-term solution, of course, is dealing with Bashar Assad's government and trying to create a stable Syrian government and beating ISIS. I mean, ISIS right now, I believe, is the major player there. And it's a unique opportunity from a geopolitical standpoint to have all these countries come together to try to defeat ISIS, because that is where common ground is right now. I mean, Iran doesn't like ISIS any more or any less than Israel does. So this is an opportunity to really create some common ground among all of the players in the Middle East to defeat ISIS. And if I had really great answers to that, I'd be over there doing it, right? Yeah.
Thank you for bringing all this to our attention, but I would like to know of the money that was earmarked by the U.S. government for aid there, how do we know that it's reaching the proper people and not going into the pockets of the politicians?
That's a very good question. My understanding of the money is, most of that money is funneled through the USAID, and it's been given to NGOs who are working on the ground, both large and small NGOs, in the host countries. Primarily the countries of Lebanon and Jordan and Turkey, because those are the countries that are shouldering the vast number of Syrian refugees. But the money's being funneled through NGOs that are vetted and working there.
Kelly, we have a request for your website again, please.
Sure, it's www.livinglargeinlimbo.com. And I also put a clipboard back by the tree for anybody who'd like to sign up and kind of get on my friends and family list, or I'll email you updates on things that are happening. I email just a couple times a year. But if you'd like to join my list, you're welcome to do that, and I'll get you my website that way as well.
Can you speak to the effects of exponential world population growth and how it's affecting the refugee situation? From an ecology standpoint, there's a term, carrying capacity. And aren't we facing a stress on the carrying capacity?
I think we are all over the world.
Kelly, what's your personal understanding of the fact that the oil-rich countries that surround Syria are doing so little to help with the refugee situation? Is it again a religious question that enters into play, or what might it be?
Well, the countries that are immediately around Syria are doing quite a bit. I mean, they're absorbing the vast majority of the Syrian refugees. And I mean, these are numbers that came from the UNHCR. Egypt has 132,000 refugees, Syrian refugees. Jordan has, well, it depends on who you talk to, but 630,000 refugees are in Jordan. If you talk to the UN, if you talk to somebody in Jordan, they say the number's more like 1.4 million refugees. Because many Syrian refugees, and this is true of Iraqi refugees as well, don't want to register with the UNHCR. They don't want to get on a list. They don't trust any kind of government list. Some of them are running from the law themselves. So there's a vast number of people who actually don't register with the United Nations. So the numbers I'm giving you are from the UN, and know that they are small, that they're the conservative side. Iraq, as I mentioned, is 250,000 refugees. And then to the north, Turkey has 1.9 million refugees. Um, Saudi Arabia is not accepting refugees as far as I know, but they have been donating, and Qatar has as well. I think is the other Middle Eastern country that's been really donating quite a bit for humanitarian aid. Sweden has accepted 80,000 refugees. Australia has accepted 4,500 refugees. Again, the U.S., 2,300. So.
Over here.
So I think you just touched on it, but are there any other countries besides America, Canada, and Europe, and the surrounding countries that are helping, like South American countries, Asian countries?
I just mentioned actually the main countries. Italy has 110,000, Greece 250,000. Canada is going to be accepting 35,000 more. I just want to implore the Americans in the audience to write our representatives and really pressure them to make sure that we meet that 10,000 refugee goal that President Obama has set out for this fiscal year. But it's mostly, it's where people can get to, so it's mostly Europe. Mostly the Middle East first, right? First, and then up to Europe. Yeah.
Hi. My question is, why isn't Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and some of the other Arab countries not taking any Syrians? And furthermore, I see the unrest going into Europe. Many of the people that I see are young, able men, well-dressed, with cell phones. They are not refugees. They are migrants looking for freebies from other countries.
Well, I wouldn't say that they're looking for, okay, that's two questions you've asked there. Okay.
I come from Canada. I'm from Calgary. We've taken in a bunch of Syrians. They live in a ghetto sponsored by government. We pay for them for a year, which is great. They won't assimilate whatsoever. It's difficult for us to accept that.
Okay, so I heard two questions in there. Why was it Saudi Arabia and UAE and some of the other Middle Eastern countries taking Syrian refugees? And the second question was, freeloaders, okay, able-bodied men. There's no doubt about it. The people who have left Syria are the people who can afford to do it. And that's one of the major challenges with trying to rebuild if the instability ever stops, or when the instability stops. People who can't afford to leave don't. Where they walk across the border into Turkey and Lebanon and they stay there because they can't afford to go any farther. The young man that I interviewed, single man, 32 years old, was a pharmacist. Also that same day I happened to talk to an Iraqi refugee, a young man with a family, with 2 children. He was a surgeon and his wife was a gynecologist. And they fled Baghdad because their hospital was stormed by guys with guns who wanted to kidnap them. And that's something that's still happening in Iraq. And so he had fled to Germany when Germany said that they would be embracing 800,000 refugees. So yes, it is the able-bodied people who are living because it's the ones who can afford to. It's the ones who can walk across borders and get there. Now, to your other question, why isn't Saudi Arabia and the UAE and Qatar and some of these other countries taking in refugees? I don't know. They're not answering my phone calls. If you have a way that I can reach them and make a difference, let me know.
Hello? I understand that Mexico is accepting over 10,000 Syrian refugees, even though this country has a problem with overpopulation and poverty. So, when I hear that amount of people or refugees being accepted by the United States, it makes me mad and disappointed.
We have free phone calls, people. Free phones, call and yell.
Do you know which cities in Mexico the Syrian refugees are coming into?
I understand that they're going to be coming into
Mostly Mexico City and maybe some in Monterrey. The problem with the northern states is the drug cartels and the drug problem, the trafficking that's going on there. It's very, very unsafe. So they're bringing them more into the southern parts of Mexico. Probably Jalisco will see quite a few of them.
Thank you very much for sharing that information. That's great.
Thank you very much for sharing that information. I appreciate it. Bill?
I worked in Saudi Arabia for 2 years, and I was confused when King Solomon took over as king of Saudi Arabia, why he was such a firebrand. Then I found out that he's under the control of one of his cousins, who's about 22. And a male 22-year-old is not one you want to talk to.
The one thing that I think we have forgotten is the cause of why you have refugees. If the cause is not solved, you will have refugees for the next 10, 20, or 30 years throughout the entire Middle East. The next great movement that's going to come from refugees is going to be in Mozambique. I guarantee that you will have 10 to 20 million refugees coming there because of the drought. It's one thing to talk about how to take care of children and how to take care of people, but unless the entire world somehow sits down and deals with Saddam or Assad or whatever it is, whether it's politics, and it always is politics. It always comes down to egos, someone who wants to be the great leader, and until the world deals with it, you will always have the same identical problem. It won't stop.
Thank you.
I'm not on, oh, no, I guess one more question, and then we'll call it a day. Back there?
I'd like to respond to the Canadian from Calgary. I'm a Canadian. And we are very proud of the fact that the government we've elected has agreed to bring in refugees. And not only that, we have families in small towns and cities that's not government sponsored, but they've been so moved that a group of people in the neighborhood have raised enough funds to bring in whole families into the country and to provide them with welfare and well-being. I'd like to really praise our Canadian government and Canadians who have answered this call, and we're trying to do our very best. Thank you.
There's a link on my website for Canadians as well, and how Canadians can help in Canada, and with some very creative ways. I mean, not just monetarily, but with some other creative ways of supporting the new refugees that are coming into Canada. So again, my website is www.livinglargeinlimbo.com, and you can sign up on the clipboard over there if you like. Thank you very much for sharing your morning with me and opening yourself up to this heartbreaking information. Thank you.
Thank you, Keller.